This episode actually is the closest relating episode we've got to the May the
4th.
Yeah, hence why I had to grab the Chewy diary just to fluff up the space a bit. Did you do anything? Do you celebrate
May the 4th?
Yeah. No.
I'm rewatching a couple of the series, so I want to rewatch the first episode or the first series of Mandalorian.
Oh, that's so
before
good.
he takes his helmet off, man.
Yeah, so good.
Because he's just got this voice, right?
Yeah,
It's
Pedro
great.
Pascal, and he's been now he's at the point where he barely does any of the acting. He just does the voice, so he's not even in the costume anymore. He just does vocal overdubs now.
Oh, I will. What was it? Last of Us? Is that? So I was flying. So just got back from the US, flying back, and they had Last of Us, and I thought, I can't sleep. I just cannot sleep. It's just on the flight back from LA, they just squeeze you in like your sardines.
Yeah.
I thought, well, I'm going to watch that the entire season. So I watched all 8 episodes. Man, that is next level, that show. Really good.
Did you play the video game?
Did not.
Because it's built on a PlayStation title that is probably one of the best PlayStation titles that's ever been released. So The Last of Us is 2 of them, and part 2 is coming out soon. But the video games are the same. The video games are so immersive. It's that game that you just can't put down.
Fallout was one that I started playing a little bit of that, and then my son said, we have to watch the Fallout show. And I just thought, I tried to watch it, and I thought, I can't get into this yet.
Fallout's got a lot of video game story behind it. So if you just walk into Fallout, it's really confusing.
Yeah, I was there. I said, what are these Master Chief guys? He said, no, they're not Master Chief.
Yeah.
Totally different franchise, Mum. I'm like, okay, all right. But yeah.
But plenty of good stuff that comes out of video games. You know, that's one thing that I'm starting to realize is that everyone used to give me a hard time for playing video games as a kid, and now it's serving as the movie content for the next generation.
Well, it is, because it's storytelling, isn't it? And if they get it right, even if they don't get it right in the video game, they get it right in the production of the show, because you've got all these showrunners that sit in the background, and a lot of them either played or have got that experience and want to actually take a concept in the show and really explode it out. And that's what makes it interesting viewing. Because
you got people that love the idea that just want to see it in a different format.
Yeah, well, the cutscenes. Cutscenes are great. You sit there watching the cutscenes going, and then, what was it? Oh my God, not Dune. What was the other one? Doom. You know, we had that first person shooter back in the day. And then they made all these spin-off movies and things and took that concept and just really extrapolated that out. And now you've got a whole genre in that space based on that first-person shooter type of idea, right?
Yeah. And now the games just roll out one after the other. We'll use storytelling as an interesting segue, because you've just told a new story, not another digital transformation. So Mary-Beth Hosking joining us today, co-author of Not Another Digital Transformation, released now?
Released now.
Released and available now. Tell us a little bit about the book.
So about 2 years ago, I was working with a colleague, and we walked out of a particular interesting business meeting where a decision had been made in the organisation, and that decision had the potential of really derailing what we were doing from a technology perspective. And what we realised was that there was very little or a lack of visibility across all of the different departments in the organisation. And we looked at each other and said, how can we have lost visibility so rapidly in such a young organisation? And what we realised is that it's not synonymous to a small organisation or a scale up, but it's across the board in all the organisations that we worked in. And we said, the way this organisation is structured, the fact that we've got a lot of silos and nobody's speaking to each other, the technology department is seen as the bad guy or the problem child. This needs to stop. And what we could see actually happening was that idea of a possible digital transformation, because the organisation was seeing the technology department as a problem instead of a solution partner.
Yeah.
And so we could see this sort of rapidly approaching, and having been through, I think together I've gone through about 8 digital transformations, all for the same reason. My writing partner, Addie Kalra, and we said there has to be a better way. There has to be a better way to create an organization and a structure where everybody knows what everyone's working on, what they're doing, what the strategic intent is from the lowest level in a department all the way through to the strategic level in a department, because all of them have those different layers. And how do we do that? How do you set your organization up to succeed in this space? And that's why we wrote the book. Because we just didn't want to be forced down yet another digital transformation.
And in one of our earlier catch-ups, admittedly, you used an analogy for me that I've not heard before, but have used since. So well done. That's the plane analogy.
Oh, yeah.
And that really resonated for me. Do you want to just cast us through that before we jump into the bits and pieces of the book?
Sure.
Go through the plane analogy because that really set it up well for me.
It is interesting, isn't it? Because, so for anyone listening to this podcast at the moment, I'm sure most of you have caught a plane. You've gone somewhere, you've taken a trip, whether it's a family holiday, a work trip or something. But when you first buy your ticket, or actually from that moment you buy your ticket, everybody that's involved in your journey on that plane flight knows exactly where you're going, where your bags should be, what time you should be there, what time you should board, what time you should disembark. And everything is visible from the ground crew all the way through to the flight controllers, to the pilot, to the ground crew at the other end at your destination. Imagine if you were working for an organization and you had that same level of visibility.
Mm-hmm.
So that idea of, I have my ticket, my itinerary. As soon as I walk up to the gate, everybody knows that I'm here to catch this flight to, to Perth, to Brisbane, wherever I'm going. They know that's where I'm going. When I check my bags, the baggage handlers know that my luggage is going to Perth. Everybody knows what it is that I'm doing. And then I get onto that flight and the flight crew, the pilot, etc., they all know exactly where we as a collective we on the flight are going.
Even the passengers, right? Like collectively as a group, these people have never met each other before, but they all know we're all going in the same direction.
We all get the same safety briefing, whether we choose to listen to it or not, but we all get the same briefing. We know where we're going to be and whether we're going to make it on time, and we are told by the pilot, welcome to this flight. This is our destination. This is the weather at our destination. This is the time we are due to arrive. We know at every step of the way.
They update you multiple times during the flight just to let you know whether or not we're a bit ahead or a bit behind.
You get the little pings. If you actually listen to the pings, each ping is telling you something different. If you fly enough, you realize that first ping means I think you've hit 10,000 feet. And then the next ping when you are at cruising altitude. And in the book, we talk about that idea of cruising altitude, which is where you want to be. Everyone knows where you're going. Everyone knows where you're headed. The only thing that's really missing from cruising altitude is going exponential and going into the stratosphere.
Yeah.
And that comes when every single person in your organization has true visibility to what everybody else is working on, what is important to them, to the individual, to the department, how that department's priorities are going to interface with every other department, and how you are going to work as a cohesive unit. So the removal, think of it like this, the removal of all of those silos, and all you're doing is creating an itinerary that everybody knows. And that's the plane analogy. And we use that at the very beginning of the book to frame up the tiers that we're talking about and the structure that we're talking about.
And interesting, because it seems so common sense when you break it down that way. But one of the things that I've found through my career and various careers, depending on the size of the businesses, because I know that you categorize the businesses in your book very well and how each category should be drawing down those resources. But I've always been aware of a culture where if it's not your department, you don't need to worry. If it's that's not your thing, leave that to them and we do what we do and off we go. And your book calls out the side effect of silos that can be generated from that sort of behavior that then lead to a knock-on effect of bloat. In modern business, what do you see as being key in individual departmental focus? So what we need to be aware of and focused on as a department, but then how that needs to cross-pollinate and translate amongst other departments to ensure we're on that flight together. What are some of the key elements that people miss on the daily?
Well, the one thing that they miss is, my department's more important than your department.
Always.
What I'm doing is more important than your priorities.
Mm.
And so therefore, when you lead in that way and your team members follow in that way, they're reluctant to share, or they perceive another department getting involved in your department's strategy and what it's trying to achieve, and they see it as a roadblock.
Mm.
So then people become a little bit more insular in their silo. And then that leads to, and we talked about this earlier, that leads to shadow IT, and we see that quite regularly. And I'm pretty sure that some of the people on this listening to this will say, well, what's shadow IT? What does that mean?
Mm.
It's that concept that I need to implement an IT style solution into my department, but I don't want to go to IT, because if I go to IT, they're just going to start calling out all the things that I might not have thought about.
Yep.
And they're just going to be roadblocking it, because that's what they do. They try to make things sound like they're worse than they are, and I just want to implement this really simple solution. And it may be that I've gone to a conference and a vendor's sold me on a solution, and I really like that idea. And some of the things that I haven't done, I haven't looked at it from a security perspective.
Mm.
I haven't looked at it from a supportability perspective. I haven't really thought about it from a licensing perspective and what that means going forward. And so what I do is I then invest in the money, because I have my own budget. If I'm leading a department, I'll have my own budget, and that's what I need to take care of. And so this is the what's in it for me. It's my budget, my department. I don't need to tell you, Mr. IT, what I'm doing over here until I do.
Yeah.
And when that happens, it's because the vendor has said, well, if you want us to support it, it's going to cost you more. You may not have considered that as part of your budget. So it's like, oh, well, we've got an IT department. I'm just going to get them to support it.
Yeah.
But I haven't taken them on the journey. So they don't know the end destination for me. All they know is that suddenly I've got a full flight and I've got an extra person on that flight and I don't know where to sit them, right? So if we use that plane analogy, so then I'm stuck. I'm IT and I start asking the hard questions, the questions that should have been asked prior to purchase. I ask the questions around, do you have the right security measures in place? Is this vendor secure, and what is it they're providing you? What do they offer in that space? Because we bring something into the estate, we need to make sure that A, it's secure, because we A, don't want a data breach, and B, we want to make sure that it actually meets the standard that we have within our organisation and that we remain security compliant. And that's a whole kettle of fish.
Yeah.
You know, there's a whole thing you don't want to open up. Then you get it doesn't fit in our estate because it's something completely different potentially. And then you get and Mr. IT, I need you to support it. And suddenly IT is faced with, we don't support that technology. It's not part of our estate. So now we have to wear the cost of managing with that decision that you made at the very top of the pipeline. I mean, it's the same idea as if you've done software dev. Get it right at the very start of the pipe so that when it's much harder to change it at the end when you've already developed and built than it is to change it at the very start. So this is what we talk about when we talk about shadow IT. And I come out of organizations, big corporates, where it was seen as if I did something in that shadow IT space, I was applauded for my ingenuity and my innovative thinking to get a solution into the business. But then when it fell down onto the IT function to support it, it was absolutely became their problem.
Yeah.
And we see it all the time.
We see it a lot. Our business in particular is technology. And I think, to call out the specifics of shadow IT seems to be really prevalent in a company that is technology based, because 70% of your staff are pretty well versed in technology. So everyone's an expert all of a sudden. And that can lead to a couple of different things, because we see it with some of the clients that we work with as well. When you talk about massive institutionalized clients that work on, 800, 900 rooms plus, there is a lot of that, because some rooms maybe are managed by an ITS strategy, a central ITS strategy within the organization. But then different departments, to your point, have their own budgets. If I go through this way, I'm going to have to submit like expense. I'm going to have to put a case forward. I could otherwise go into my kitty, buy a couple of cool things, put them on the wall, no problems. But when they've got a managed service partner or someone that's costed to take care of that service, that's when you find out that they did the wrong thing, because it's that they go, we need some help with this. We don't support that. that's not standard. Where did you get that? Oh, just from JB. Just bought it on the weekend and plugged it. Is that on the network? Yeah, that's on the network now. Okay. We need to talk. So it's something that we see all the time.
And then you're the bad guy.
Yeah, we're the blocker.
You're the blocker. You're stifling the innovation.
Mm.
And we don't want to stifle innovation. But imagine if we all knew where we were headed and we all were across that, and wouldn't it be nice? Think of it like this. And maybe I was on I was speaking to a colleague and they said, wow, it's quite utopian what you're thinking. And I said, I know, isn't it amazing? How amazing would it be?
Mm.
Would you love working at a company like this? But how amazing would it be for every department to have that advocacy in IT and the IT advocacy in that department to actually have that conversation to go, what's the problem you're trying to fix? Let's help you solve that problem and let's make it workable for you and let's work together. Let's be your partner on this journey instead of a hindrance to you. But a lot of the time you're just not ever asked. You don't even have a seat at the table.
Yeah. So is it about, to the point you made earlier with the software dev reference, solid collaboration early on? Rather than 2 or 3 people coming up with a great idea, seeing it 70% of the way through and then dropping it public within there's 30% left to go. So is that about bringing those ideas to a platform much earlier?
Yeah, and in the book we talk about that idea. It's this, we kind of use this concept of threes. So it's this idea that, when you're in a meeting, bring 3 really good ideas to the table so that they can be challenged and looked at, and then something will rise to the top so that everybody has a say, everybody has a voice. Because when you empower everybody, and sometimes ideas might be just so left of field to say, well, we really can't do that because of budgetary constraints or whatever. But when you're having those conversations and you're opening the conversations up and people have that visibility, they're more inclined to want to continue having more conversations and taking you with them on their problem-solving mission, because that's really what it is. Instead of IT being seen as a service provider, you have an IT department in your organization. They're not a service provider. They're working for the same company as you are.
Yeah.
So treat them as if they were a partner with you, not a service provider that should be slapped down when they make a mistake. I see that so often. It's like, IT is always the brunt of the problem. It's like they wouldn't be if you took them through what it is that you're actually needing. What do you want to have? What's going to make your operation run more efficiently? I mean, what is IT? We're here to automate as much as we can so that we can make things easier, so that the minutiae of your day-to-days and your administrative tasks go away so you can think more innovatively and we can get more thought leadership.
Yep.
Isn't that really what we're trying to do?
When you boil it down like that. Yeah, most certainly. And to your point, the more I think about it now, it makes sense, because you always give IT a hard time when something doesn't work, but you're not thanking them the other 365 days of the year when everything's running. It's like, what's wrong with the server? My email doesn't work. This is the 3rd time this happened this year. Like, yeah.
Yes. But well, there's that old adage, if somebody complains about something, they'll tell 50 people. If they like something, they'll tell 3. So people like to sort of complain. But what we're saying is we're wanting to create this sense of advocacy, but for all departments, not just IT. The book isn't about, poor IT.
Yeah.
It's about creating a vision where, if one department were unable to function, every other department would still be able to function. It's kind of like that. Think of a microprocessor, right? It can work independently on its own to still meet a strategic need, or it can work within a group or a whole.
Yeah. And I think that's where, so you break down a lot of the challenges that come up in this book into 3 main areas where we can look at them strategically, tactically, and operationally.
Yeah.
So explain that to us, because that's one of those things where I think if you're a traditional business person, you would be inclined to consider those separate functions: operations, technology, strategic. But there's a way to combine them, right? So that everyone's benefiting from all 3.
So operations for us in our book, that's kind of like that tech hub. Operations is your tech hub. Your departments are represented by your tactical type of area, and then strategic, so your C-suiters. So that sort of that big, heavy-hitting decision-making, the blue sky, North Star type of idea. So that's your operation, tactical, and your strategic. Within each of those, however, you've got an operation, a tactical, and a strategic. And you have to, because the technology department has to have its own strategy to underpin the overarching strategy of the organisation. Finance, again, has to have its own strategy to underpin that of the organisation. Where we get disconnect is when they don't meet up and they don't link up with that strategic organisational intent. So the idea is each of those departments and the operation and the strategic all work in little pods, as it were. So you'll have an HR representative or somebody that's very strong in HR, somebody that understands finance, somebody that understands different functioning within the organisation as an advocate, talking about what it is that they need. And then you've got your tech in there, and then you've got somebody strategic that sits in there in that one pod. And each pod is there to deliver service to the organisation as a whole, and then you break it down into different pods. Some organisations do this to some extent with this idea of an HR business partner.
Oh, yep.
Yeah, you've heard of that concept.
Yep.
You might have a finance business partner, but they're really acting as a support function. What they're not doing, it's that HR business partner. What HR services do you need from the HR department? What we're saying is almost embedding an HR person so that any of the HR functioning within that pod is already managed and resourced accordingly for that pod and that unit that's doing that work. So then you have somebody that from a finance perspective isn't there sitting there going, oh, I'm just going to help you with your budgets. That they're helping you day to day and understanding what your budget is doing to the overall budget.
Yep.
Because sometimes you will lose that. If you aren't a CEO managing a full P&L and you're just managing your IT budget, you lose visibility to what's actually happening. In some organizations, marketing have a massive budget. They can do whatever they like. And so that's when we start getting MarTech, which has nothing to do with the technology function.
Yeah.
Because marketing systems and things are so very different. But they're not.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's that concept. So having the advocacy and having those individuals working within the pods so that the strategy is understood, they go back out into their main area, then back in, so that there's that constant flow of communication, of visibility, so that we all know.
Is that a downhill thing? So do we need to, as a business, you've got to have the global strategy before you build the micro strategy. Is that right? Or is it more about it just connecting enough so that if there's changes in the micro strategy, we can inform the macro? Like, is that how does that?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. Because you may have something down at that lower tier, in that operational layer. That's if your organization is building a service or building applications for the market, then you absolutely want to get that from the operational tier, don't you? You want to know, because they're the ones they're the engine room that are going to be providing you with that either that service or with that application that's going to go out to the market, that's going to get you more market share.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure that it can be. But I believe it's top down and bottom up. Do you have to have a strategy at the start? I think you have to have some idea of where you want to go to. You can buy that ticket on a mystery flight if you're okay to fly from Melbourne to Adelaide for a long weekend. But if you want to go, I want to go to New York City because that's where it's all happening, then you want to buy a ticket and you want to know where you're going. So you want to have that visibility going forward of where your organisation needs to go. Now, it may not be as fully fleshed out a strategy as some other organisations, but you have to have a goal and a North Star. Otherwise, your organisation isn't going anywhere. Yeah.
Well, or it's just there to generate revenue. There's no, additional drive or
but if generating revenue is your strategic goal, then you want
That's
to.
okay.
It is, but however, if you want to build year on year, whatever 10%, 15% growth year on year, then that becomes your strategy, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And you can start off with a nice little mission. Like startups have a mission of what they, actually, no, they have a vision to start with. They have a vision of this is what they want to build or what they want to do. And then everybody jumps on board the vision.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to be able to tell an engaging story to get your first employees, because at that point in time, you have nothing. There's actually no strategy or direction really.
So that vision then, but we lose, I think when you look at these bigger organizations, they start to lose their visions and their missions, and it becomes like 3 bullet points on a slide, and you think, okay, they've lost that ability to storytell. And you're right, we love that idea of storytelling. That's what makes change so effective. It's the stories that we tell of the really good transformations we've been through.
Yeah, the hope that it's going to get better.
You want it better. The thing is that, and what we're not talking about, I wanted to sort of make this really clear, Mike, is that we're not talking about a technology uplift.
No.
You have to do that. You've got to keep your technology current. You know, if you think you don't need to, then look at some of the major banks.
Yeah.
You kind of need to do that because people want more from your service. So you have to be giving them more. A consumer is going to consume your services, and if you want them to consume more, then you need to be providing them with more of what it is that they want. We do talk a lot in the book about voice of the customer as well.
Yeah.
And having voice of the customer sitting within each of the pods. Because what we've noticed, and we see this a lot in technology companies that are building services or applications for consumption, is that they'll have a product team who will think they're talking, that they believe that they are the voice of the customer.
Yeah.
But then,
and yes, because we have had that here, and you know, again, to your earlier point, when you're tech savvy and you're in a tech company, your role can become very confusing because you are a user of tech, you're a purchaser of tech, you've got tech at home, you're pretty comfortable with tech, you've got a tech degree. Of course, I'm the customer, I must be right. But you automatically frame that conversation as you're looking at a consumer of tech with the same knowledge that you've got, where the end user that you're talking about doesn't have anywhere near the understanding that you've got. So you have to, by default, remove yourself as being a customer because that customer doesn't have your understanding. That person is, like, I always go to my mum whenever there's anything to do with painting a clear picture or how to explain my way through technology. If I can do it that mum could wrap her head around it, then it's a win, because my mum is the least technical savvy person in the world. My mum gets anxious just at the thought of using technology. So for my role in our business, I've always tried to do that. I don't always succeed, but yeah, remembering that you have to build solutions for the lowest common denominator out in consumer world, not for the person that has the same skill set that you've got.
I think I remember when the first iPhone came out in Australia. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Was it 3G?
3G.
Yeah.
No, 3G was our one, and then 3GS was the speed bump.
Yeah. So we got the 3G. I remember my husband was an absolute early adopter. So
It was day one.
Yeah. So we've still got the Apple Newton in the cupboard.
Oh, really?
It still works.
Yeah.
Well, as works is a relative term. It turns on.
Yeah.
It's still as responsive as it was when it came out. But I remember my husband saying to me, "Do you want one of these new smartphones?" And I said, "No, I've got my Nokia. I like my Nokia.
Yeah.
I know what it does. I'm okay."
Snake.
What I didn't realize, my Nokia could actually go onto the internet, but it was so complicated to do it. I never did it, but I was used to my Nokia, right?
Yeah.
I could put it on its little mount, and I could have my hands free, and when I was driving and do that sort of thing. But I remember him opening the box. I remember the sound, and it was so pretty. And then he powered it up, and I looked at it, and it was so intuitive that I literally was on that within 5 minutes.
Yeah. I have goosebumps while you're saying this because I had exactly the same experience.
And that's voice of the customer at work, and Apple does it extraordinarily well.
Yep.
In that first instance, I mean, obviously, then they're there are the other companies that come out and jump on the back of all of that, and they may do some things that are better and all that. But that first moment, and I remember my husband's grandparents, they were octogenarians at the time. They bought iPhone because it was easy to use. They could actually use it. And they bought iPads because they needed to be able to book their golf at their golf club on the iPad. And it was, again, so intuitive and easy to use. So when we talk about voice of the customer, if you relinquish control of voice of the customer to a product team, then you're absolutely right. The product team is going to think about how they would use and consume, not necessarily how the different demographics within your market are going to use and consume. And that's where voice of the customer is so important. And we talk a lot about that in the book as well, because if you're not considering that, then you're missing you're taking a huge gamble that what you're actually going to be putting out to the market is going to be consumable by the majority.
Yeah.
And it's not even the lowest common denominator. It's even more than that, because you're going to have a demographic within a demographic, et cetera, and needing to understand that. And then if you're not measuring what your customers want, if you're not getting some sort of whether you use net promoter scores, whatever you're using, if you're not using those sorts of measures, how do you know you're succeeding if it's just a monetary measure? You're measuring the lifetime of your customer, you're measuring that. I mean, there's books on that. We didn't write about all of those because if you want to know what a smart measure is, you can Google that.
Yep.
What we're saying, though, is when you're making decisions about how your organization is going to be organized, really think about the implications of the things that you do. In one organization, I saw them separate product from technology because they thought that was the right thing to do. And what it did was it created a massive divide between what technology needed to deliver and what product wanted, instead of them working in harmony. And that is how they work in harmony, when they work together. And so seeing the way organizations make decisions and then the potential for how it could derail what it is that they do, that was one of the reasons why we wrote the book.
Yeah. And the book calls out, 4 sort of key categories that you can identify your business going through, or where your business might be. So we called out startup, scale up, SMB, and enterprise. Is it important to identify where you think you fit in that scale? And I think particularly for me, and again, I always refer back to the business that I'm in currently right now, where it's small enough that you could sort of say that it was running startup, but it's not, because it's been around long enough and it's definitely got enough structure in it to be scale up. Or are we, scale up into SMB? That's probably the one I think that's most interesting for me. It's pretty clear when you can identify a scale up and a startup. When do we start to need to identify a transition from scale up to SMB? And is that one of the most important transitions?
Yeah, that's a big transition.
Yeah.
That is, because that's where you start to see significant bloat. When you go from scale up to startup to scale up. If people are, so startup is that, that very flat structure. Everybody's doing everything.
3 people in the basement.
And and then it can be up to 100 people in a startup, but they all have the same vision, same goal. Lots of people wearing multiple hats, mostly exhausted all the time, but still really, really excited and drinking lots and lots of beer on a Friday night. So that's kind of your sort of startup. And we all love them. And those of us that have had the luxury of working in a startup, and I know for me personally, I worked in a startup at one point, and every job I go for still these days, I lean towards it. Oh, has it got the startup feel? Because there's something pretty good about that cowboy mentality. Like, we just got to make it work, we want, and we've got these hurdles to meet, and we're all sort of rushing to that first hurdle to get over it, to get to the next hurdle. And it's very exciting. It gives you the juice. It really does. And, you can go through, I was at a startup that turned into a scale up. I was there for 8 years. It was a long 8 years, but gee, I remember waking up on Monday mornings like, oh, I can't wait to get to work.
Yep.
Because I knew it was going to be exciting, interesting, and new.
And a bunch of stuff that you're probably not even prepared for, right? Like part of the challenges of a startup is there's a whole bunch of stuff you might not have ever dealt with before. So there's some learning there.
And it's messy. And it's messy but it's great. It's great when you push something into production and it breaks everything and you're woken up at 4 a.m. because nobody tested the change. But I don't know, it's fun. Not so much fun when you're at the 4 a.m. and you're trying to fix it, but I don't know. I have maybe rose-colored glasses. However, back to the point.
Yeah, so are there pitfalls or things that we need to look out for when we're doing that trend? So scale up to SMB?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we need to be looking at is the tendency is to bring in people with a lot of past experience. So we want to hire people that have got experience, that have been working in the last 10 or 15 years. So you'll see job adverts going out, have you got 10 plus years experience, And that's great because you want that experience. What you really want is to bring in people that have a curious mindset and are innovative in their thinking and are not just going to take that cookie cutter approach of this worked in my last business, I'm going to do the same thing that I did in my last business into this business. Because if we do that, we will create silos, we will create what we call bloat. So that is in my last business, I had to have a head of that did this and that and this role and that role and this role and that role. So I will start to build that infrastructure out because I know that worked in my last business.
I've fallen victim to that myself. Yeah. So I relate.
So 100%. What I urge people to do is this: when you are about to transition into that small to medium business, if you bring in somebody that has that experience, ask them what they're looking for and what they would do what they would do in that business, and really understand what they'd say. And if they say, in my past business I did this, 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 and this, you may want to step back and go, okay, well, that's interesting. But if you get somebody that says, I like to review an organization for a good 3 months and then decide what's missing, what's going to help it run more efficiently. Somebody that thinks more leanly. And I say that from that Six Sigma sort of space, that black belt space, thinking more leanly in your approach. Now, if you wanted to implement, let's say, ITIL as an example, if you were going into a pure tech company, purely tech, CI, CD, CD, they've got all of that in place. Would you want to bog it down with a change board? What do they call it? Change advisory board or an advisory board? Would you want to bog it down with that additional level of process because it fulfills something in the ITIL space? Maybe not, because that's just another area of, that you add another check or another measure that might not necessarily be needed for that organization. So when you bring in leaders, they should be thinking about what is pertinent to this organization to help it continue to run efficiently, effectively, instead of bringing in, well, I've done this in the past, I'm just going to retrofit this here.
Yeah.
So that's what I would urge you to do as you're starting to move from that scale up into that SMB. So think about that. And then look at your structure and maybe have a look at what we've got in 10X generation state. What does that look like? And if we're about to embark on that, could we create this structure and then let it run and see what happens there? Because I'm almost certain that when you start giving every single person, because let's assume you've gone through that startup to scale up, everybody in the startup had visibility. In the scale up, they'll have visibility, but they may start losing it because your silos will already be created, and so they may be losing that. But imagine what it would be like if you went to SMB. All of those structures that were starting to get a bit verbose, all of those processes that were starting to blow out. Suddenly, when you're in an SMB, if you don't do something about it, then it starts to get even worse.
Yeah.
Till you hit enterprise, and then in enterprise, you've got massive departments where somebody's walking around with a slight piece of paper and not actually doing anything.
And it takes months, if not years, to implement any form of change. That's one of the blessings, I think, if you do it right at the smaller tiers, is you can be very reactive to your market. Yep. Where once you get to enterprise level, By the time the market shifted, like if you don't know what's coming, you'll never be able to keep up with a market at that level because it's always chasing your tail.
And this is why disruptors are so disruptive,
Yeah.
right? They're small, they're agile, they're able to, and I say agile as in fast, not agile as in Scrum.
Yep.
So, but they are fast. And so you will see a startup will come in and they'll have a great idea. Uber, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Boom, they came in. Now they're heavy.
Yeah.
They're heavy, and it's just the next disruptors around the corner. So, and that's what you'll get, because you can be lean when everybody knows your vision and everybody's on the same path as you are.
There's a saying that's creeping up in the disruption field now that I see a lot of businesses being referred to, and it's referred to as enshittification. And it's an interesting analogy where a company like Uber or a company like Airbnb, they start off with a very direct value proposition. And that value proposition is we'll get you from A to B cheaper in a nicer car, no hassles. You just pay for it on your phone, it's all good. And that's what Uber did well, but that wasn't profitable. And so then what happens is you start to creep in with all of these other things where it's like, okay, well now you've got this car, but if you want the comfortable car, that's going to cost extra. And if you want the really comfortable car, well, now that costs more again. And then if you look at the Eats model, sure, you can have it delivered. But if you want it delivered quicker, like we'll give you a priority delivery now where it's just from them to you, that's an extra $3. And then there's a service fee for this. And what we forget is, as the consumer, what we fell in love with that brand no longer exists, but we're still connected to the brand. So is there a responsibility for businesses that are disrupting? Is the responsibility of the business to understand when enshittification is beginning and we correct that? Or is it really up to the consumer just to make the decision with their wallet?
It's going to be the consumer. Well, you would like to think it was the business because there are people that underpin those businesses, right?
Yeah.
And they're the ones that are impacted ultimately if the business folds, if it goes under, etc. But I think that having the consumer is king. Right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So if you're not listening to your consumer and what it is that they want, then you'll just be left behind.
Something's going to happen.
It will. And, Uber Eats was a convenience. It was a convenience at a point in time. And it's that whole idea that they were there during COVID, right? So you could just get the sort of food that you wanted to get. If in my local area, in the 5-kilometre radius of where I live, there are 8 fish and chip shops.
Oh, good. So plenty of fish and chips during COVID.
But I'd have to get Uber if I wanted dumplings or something, because it was 5 kilometres too far for me to be allowed to drive, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm pretty sure I could have done that, but law abiding, all that sort of thing. However, it was there. So Uber Eats, all of those services, they provided that service. It was great. But you're right, it's the add-ons. But you see add-ons with everything. You see
everything.
It with air flight. So if I'm flying with a certain airline, I buy a ticket. Oh, in the States, man, that's nuts. In the States, I buy a ticket. That gets me the seat.
Yeah.
I then have to pay for my luggage. And then I have to pay for food if I want to have food.
Yeah.
It's just everything's an added extra. So when you look at it, you go, oh, yeah, $150, that's not bad. And then suddenly it's $60 for this and then another this and then this. It suddenly becomes an add-on. It's almost like when you are in the States, you get that. I said the bill shock is that you're in a store and it's like, oh yeah, that's $1.50. That's great. Plus tax.
Yeah.
And the tax is different everywhere. And it's that idea. But unless the consumer makes the change, then the business won't.
Yeah.
Because if they're still making money and a profit, then they'll continue doing what it is that they do. It's when their market share starts to drop. What I would have to say, though, to organizations out there is don't let your market share drop. You want to keep building and building on that. As soon as you're on that downward spiral, it's really hard to get back up again. And if you were a disruptor, then you need to be investing in a little bit of what's the next innovative thing that we could be doing?
Yeah.
What is the next thing? They're using AI, and you know that they're using AI because it's coming up with, well, you've eaten here, so maybe this will, you may want to eat there. And that's how they're using AI, but they could probably use it even smarter than that.
Mm. One thing about the book we haven't spoken about is just the unique way in which the book is written. So the book isn't just a book. Like, the book's actually been put together as a play script. I read out of Acts 1, scenes 1 and 8. But walk us through first sort of what that approach is about, and sort of, it obviously seems there's a bit of gamification there, which is an essential thing. But why did you come at it in that way? And is there, from what I understand, you have a performance background as well. And is that part of the drive in pulling it together this way?
So Addie and I used to meet at about 9 a.m. at this little cafe near where we worked. And 9 a.m. on a Monday morning was our let's talk about the book, what we've done in the last week, what we're planning to do going forward. And we got to the point, we'd written sort of the concepts and all those sorts of things. And then we were talking about, how do we get these ideas across?
Mm.
And so we said, well, we could write a narrative. We just both had reread the Phoenix Project, which is, if you're into DevOps, Phoenix Project is probably the book to read.
Mm.
And it's great. It's a narrative. And I remember reading that book and having heart palpitations, thinking, oh my God, I've lived through this.
Yeah.
And I said that to Addie. I said, it put me into such an uncomfortable place. And it's great because that's what you want. You want a visceral reaction to what you're reading because it makes it even more pertinent to when you get to the end and what the solution is. And I said to Addie, I don't want to write a narrative. I don't want to write a story because and at that point we had about 100 different scenarios. And I said, how do we write these as a story? And we thought about it and we said, well, you know what? What about if we wrote it as 3 acts? So you've got your operational act, Act 1, your tactical act, Act 2, your strategic act, Act 3. And so we did that. And then we wrote 12 scenarios. We took the 12 scenarios that were the best out of, this 100 scenarios that made sense in the operational space, and we wrote them as scenes. So what you get is Act 1, and then there are 12 scenes.
Mm.
So you can read a scene that maybe something you're going through right now, and then see in the scene what the actual problem is. And then if you were to use the 10X generation principles, what it would look like and how you would implement that.
Mm.
And so we've done that across 36 scenarios. It might sound like a lot of scenarios, but the individuals that have read the book already have come back to us and said, oh my God,
they're quite easy to read.
And I've lived through 80% of them.
Mm.
We've obviously, created the names and changed names and things, but these are things that we've actually lived through in the last, combined experience of 30 plus years with Addie and I. And we've lived through a lot of these. And the unfortunate thing is, most of you that will read the book, you will read these scenarios and you will have experienced them multiple times.
Yeah.
And that's the saddest thing, is that and a lot of people, they'll be in a role, they're dissatisfied with the role that they're at, dissatisfied with the company. They'll move to another company and same stuff.
Mm.
Because, the organizations are sort of very much constructed in the same way. They've got the same tall structure, that sort of thing, unless you get into a really good startup, and then that's a little different again. But you're just going from one problem to another problem, and then there will be a scenario for that. So we decided we'd write the scenarios in that way.
Yeah.
They're tagged. So you can look at it and go, oh, okay, well, this is this layer. This is for an SMB really, and it's the tactical. We've done that because sometimes they're pertinent to more than just one of the streams.
Okay, sure. Yeah. So you just know which ones to spend your time on and which ones to not.
Yeah, and what we recommend is read them end to end. Maybe Post-it note the ones that are more pertinent that you might be going through. And if you're a launch partner with the book, depending on the level of launch partner that you're at, if you're actually experiencing a real problem, and you're at a higher tier in the launch partner space, then you can have a one-to-one with us and we'll walk you through that.
Yeah, right. How do people go about becoming a launch partner?
Oh, you just go to our website. So that's www.quantumtransformation/10xgen.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you just scroll down on the page, you'll see launch partner and you can join up. And then all you need to do is buy a copy, read it, and do a couple of the little things. Come back to us saying, hey, I've done this. This is where my review is, et cetera, and then we will book in some time.
Yeah, do that. do that. We'll have all the links in all the comments and things below anyway. But yeah, if you want to pursue that path, then by all means do it. Where's the book available? Is it all the majors?
All Amazon.
Yep.
It's all on Amazon.
Yep.
So
digital and analog. So for people.
You can get it as PDF.
Yep.
Or as a hardcover.
Cool.
Yep. So or hard copy.
Yep.
We're not. A lot of people have asked if we're going to do an audiobook.
Very popular.
Yeah, no, but it's so hard. How do you talk through the charts and things?
Yeah, and I suppose that's the thing. If it's a book that's a little bit more, instructional and conceptual, it might be difficult. But particularly for people like me, I'm ADHD. I read a page 4 times before it soaks in. If I'm walking around listening to the audio, it's a little bit easier for me. But yeah, it's just a frustration that comes with having to read a page 4 times before I understand it. So no audiobook yet, maybe in the future.
Maybe, yeah. We're just, at this stage, we'll just see, the publishers are like, yeah, we're not going to do an audiobook. We're like, okay, but we'll see. See how many sales. We'll see what happens. It's going to be on sale in India in the next week or so, we've been told. So India is one of our bigger markets, but watch this space. So hopefully it'll be on Flipkart and Amazon India. But it's on Amazon AU, Amazon UK, Amazon .com, so in the US and Canada. So you can get it in Europe as well. We'll
put all those links down for anyone that wants to follow up. What is next? Because writing a book is no small feat. I've not written a book, and I'm thinking, okay, after you write a book, so you have to go and tour the book. Is there like a marketing promo sort of campaign that you follow the book around and do some stuff?
Are you watching too many shows?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what it's like being an author. I write for a magazine and I submit my article and the magazine comes out. That's it.
Yeah, so it is a little different. This is my 3rd book. So with this, yes, I'm going to the UK. I'm at an event with the House of PMO. So I am talking about the concepts of the book, but also about sort of working in that PMO space. Because if you're in a project management office and it's set at the right organizational level, then they're the ones that would help to implement something like 10x Gen. So it's a nice little segue into the book. So I'm over in the UK doing lots of podcasts. I'm looking for someone to help me launch it here in Melbourne, and my writing partner is in the US, so he's looking for the same. But this is our first book together, so we have to do a lot of the marketing ourselves. So there's lots and lots on socials. So if you go on 10x Gen, on Facebook, Insta, LinkedIn, etc. There's a whole heap of socials, the pre-launch socials, and then we've got the socials now. And then you just basically buy the book.
And then if anyone needs any help or support in implementing these strategies into a business, so they've read the book, there's some stuff that really resonates, but now I need some help to implement that. What do we do?
Contact Mary-Beth via Quantum Transformation. That's the business. So contact me and let's have a conversation, because really it's a big revolutionary change. This is not a change that can be done. It's not an evolution. It's not something that will just go through and you can make a tweak here and a tweak there. If you're going to do it, you're going to need to really focus, and it has to be top down and bottom up. You really have to bring everybody along for the journey and make sure that they understand that this is not a digital transformation.
Yeah, and there's no start and stop, right? Am I right in saying that transformation is inherently an evolutionary process, right? You can't say, yeah, we're going to transform and then we've transformed and we just get on with life in the new transformed approach.
You will need to implement the processes and the backbone of 10x Gen to reach that state, that state of being and state of operating. So it's an operating model if you think about that. So once you've got that operating model in place, it's about tweaking it. So the idea is, and what's next for us with the book is we want to write a book around just the operational tier, then a book around just the tactical tier. This is the first inroad. This is what it looks like. So a lot of people are sitting there going, well, this is a utopian state. I just don't know how to get there. We want to write the books that will help each different state, each different tier get to where they need to be and what is it they need to have. So what you'll get here is a taste of what is to come.
Well, that brings us to the end, Mary-Beth. And it's like my mind is still whirling from all the things that I I'll be watching this episode probably 4 or 5 times myself. For anyone that wants to get in touch, all the links in the content below. We'll also link some of the previous books that you've worked on. Anything that anyone wants to get in touch with Mary-Beth on, you'll have every avenue to do that after we release the episode. For anyone that wants to be involved in being part of the partner program, all those links will be there as well. I don't have anything else to say other than thank you so much. And thanks for the copy of the book. I'm the first act. I've read the first act. I'm going to finish the last 2. And then I think we'd like to get you involved here and do a couple of things with us as well. I think that would be helpful. But thank you.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me. And happy May the 4th.
Yeah. Yeah, this will be out. We'll date stamp it May the 4th because this is the May the 4th episode for anyone that's watching. This is the May the 4th tribute episode, but it'll be out much later than May the 4th. Thanks. And let's hang out again. I want to catch up once you've come back from the tour. I think it'd be good to follow up and see how things are going.
Thank you. I'd love it.
Thanks. That's it.